Martha sat on the bed, the room silent except for the ticking clock and the faint buzz of the phone screen still glowing in her hand. The map showed a blue dot resting far from any airport. Her breath felt caught between disbelief and dread. She whispered his name into the quiet, but it sounded strange now, like a word that had forgotten its meaning. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, a glitch, a wrong signal, but the longer she stared, the more that little dot seemed alive, mocking her with truth she was not ready to see. She opened his old messages one by one, reading each as if the right combination of words could erase what she had found. Every "I love you," every "see you soon" was now evidence instead of comfort. The pattern of his travel days, the timing of his calls, they all lined up like pieces of a puzzle that never should have fit. Her hands trembled. She set the phone on the table and stared at it like it might start talking, explain everything, fix everything, but the only sound was her heartbeat, heavy and uneven. Morning crept in silver through the curtains. She moved to the window, watching a city that looked unchanged while her world tilted. She brewed coffee out of habit, not thirst. The smell filled the kitchen, and for a moment she felt normal. She even reached for a second cup before remembering there was no one to share it with. Not really. She folded her arms around herself and tried to hold still, tried to stop her mind from spinning with pictures of where he might be, of who he might be with. By noon she was in the car, driving nowhere at first, then letting instinct follow the route on the map. Each turn another question she could not answer. She told herself she only wanted closure, just to see that the address was wrong. But when the houses began to look newer, cleaner, quieter, she felt her chest tighten. Her fingers clenched the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. And then she saw it, the silver car, same dent, same sticker, parked in front of a white house with a porch swing moving gently in the wind. She slowed to a crawl, the street almost too peaceful, children laughing somewhere close. She parked across the road and watched a woman step out holding a small boy, maybe 3, maybe 4. The sound of his laughter was sharp and bright like sunlight. She froze as another figure stepped onto the porch, David, coffee cup in hand, the same jacket he had worn when he kissed her goodbye 2 days earlier. He smiled at the boy, at the woman, then lifted the child high into the air. The sight cut through her like glass. Her first thought was that she must be dreaming, her second that she wished she were. She sank lower in the seat, her fingers gripping the edge of the window, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but the air had left her body. She reached for the phone, almost dropping it, and snapped a picture, her hand shaking, not from anger yet, but from the shock of a heart realizing what the mind already knew. When they all went back inside, she stayed there still as a statue, staring at the porch swing, now empty, the quiet almost too loud. She did not know how long she sat like that, minutes, hours, maybe both. The sunlight shifted and shadows stretched across the yard. She started the engine and drove away, tears blurring the road, the world outside her window losing color. The only thing she could hear was the sound of her own breathing, uneven and scared. Back home the house felt foreign, every photograph on the wall a lie. She went room to room, touching objects that once meant safety, the sofa, the frame of their wedding picture, the suit jacket he had forgotten to pack. She sat down with the laptop, opened his travel receipts, his calendar, the emails from clients. She compared them to the printed invoice, the same street name, the same dates. She realized how easily love can hide in plain sight. She tried calling once, the ringtone filled the room, but she hung up before he could answer. What could she even say that would not shatter her own voice? She looked at the clock, then at the phone again, waiting for the sound of a message that never came. She poured herself another cup of coffee, now cold. She stood by the window, the street outside glowing under streetlights, and thought of all the nights she had believed he was somewhere above the clouds when he was really here, living another truth. When he finally called later that evening, she stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. She could not bring herself to answer, not yet. She needed time to breathe, to let the new reality settle. She sat on the floor, the invoice beside her, the photo on her lap, her eyes burning from tears she could no longer hold. She whispered his name one last time and felt it fall apart in the air like ash. She knew that nothing after tonight would be the same. The perfect lie had started to unravel. The morning came like a thief, gray and silent. Martha hadn't slept the night before. The hours had stretched endlessly, each thought circling back to the same image, that porch, that child, that smile. She could still hear the laughter echoing in her mind, the kind of sound that used to belong to her home. She sat at the kitchen table, the phone in front of her again, her thumb hovering above the call button, then pulling back again and again. She needed words, but every sentence felt like a wound waiting to end. By noon she couldn't stand the waiting anymore. She dressed carefully, not because she wanted to look good, but because it felt like armor. Every small act deliberate, hair pulled back, coat buttoned, shoes clean. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized. Her face calm, her eyes steady, but underneath was a storm, a quiet fury that trembled in her chest. She picked up the car keys, her heart heavy but certain, and drove one. The drive felt longer this time, the streets more real, the sky lower. She parked near the same house, the silver car in the driveway again. This time she didn't stay in the car. She stepped out, her shoes crunching on the gravel, each sound echoing in her ears. She walked across the street slowly, not sure if her legs would hold her, until she was standing at the gate. The porch light was off, the curtains drawn. She could see the shadow of movement inside. She took a deep breath and knocked. For a moment nothing, then the door opened and there he was, David, the man she had loved for 10 years, the man who told her he was flying to Chicago. His face froze, his lips parted in shock, the color drained from his cheeks. Martha didn't speak at first, she just looked at him, letting the silence do the work. He stammered her name like a question, like he didn't know whether to run or pull her inside, and then from behind him came a small voice, the boy from before, calling Daddy. The woman appeared next, her eyes wide, confusion flickering into fear. She looked from Martha to David, trying to understand the connection. Martha's breath hitched, her gaze locked on the child, and something inside her cracked. She turned back to David and whispered barely above a breath, "How long, David? Just tell me how long." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "It's not what you think," he started, but the words fell flat between them. She stepped inside uninvited, her eyes scanning the room, family pictures on the wall, none of them hers, toys scattered across the carpet, a half-finished cup of coffee on the table, the smell of a home that wasn't hers but was his. Her throat tightened. She turned to the woman. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice calm but breaking. "I didn't come here to fight, I just needed to see the truth." The woman nodded slowly, tears welling up, realization dawning like slow sunlight. This wasn't a stranger, this was his wife. David tried to speak, reaching out, but she stepped back. "Don't touch me, not now, not after this," she whispered. "You could have told me, you could have chosen honesty over comfort, over convenience, but you built a life here while I built one on lies. Do you even know what that feels like?" Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. She wanted him to see the wreckage he had made, not just hear it. She wanted the truth to hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. The boy peeked from behind the couch, holding a toy car, too young to understand the storm unfolding, too innocent to know that his laughter had become the sound of betrayal. Martha looked at him and felt something shift, the anger dulled, replaced by sorrow, by something deeper and quieter. She turned back to David and said, "This isn't his fault, don't make it his." She looked at the woman. "I'm sorry again, truly," then stepped toward the door, the world outside brighter. Then she remembered. David followed her out, calling her name, his voice desperate now. Martha stopped halfway down the path and turned one last time. "Don't call me until you have the courage to tell the truth to both of us," she said, her tone steady, not cold, not cruel, just done. She walked to the car, her hands shaking as she started the engine and drove away, tears falling silently, but her breath growing steadier with every mile. She didn't know what came next, but she knew this: she was finally awake. That night she sat by the window again, lights of the city flickering like tiny reminders that life keeps moving. She thought of all the years she'd spent waiting for him, the dinners alone, the empty beds, the business trips that were really visits to another world. She realized she had been living in the shadow of someone else's happiness, and for the first time in a long time she wanted her own. She whispered to herself, "I will not be the victim of his story anymore," and closed her eyes, letting peace find her for a moment. The night stretched endlessly before her, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and blue as she drove without direction, the hum of the tires a low constant whisper against her thoughts. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't go home, not yet, not to that bed that still smelled like him. She stopped at a gas station, the cold air hitting her face like a slap, and she realized her hands were trembling. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself out loud as if the world might answer, "What have you done, David? What have you done to us?" Inside the small gas station store, she stood between aisles staring blankly at shelves of snacks and maps and magazines, all these small things of ordinary life surrounding her as if mocking her pain. She bought a bottle of water just to have something to hold. The cashier smiled politely, and she almost wanted to tell him everything, to pour out the truth to a stranger, but instead she just nodded and left. She sat in the car, unscrewing the bottle, staring out the windshield, watching the neon lights flicker and fade. Her phone buzzed once, a message from David. She didn't open it. Another buzz, then another. She put it face down on the seat, gripping the steering wheel. As tears began to rise again, she whispered into the silence, "You don't get to talk now, not after this, not until I can breathe." Without shaking, she turned the ignition and drove again, this time heading nowhere she knew, until the familiar glow of the old bridge came into view, the one they used to walk across when they first moved to the city, the one where he told her he'd never lie to her. She parked and got out, the night air colder now, her breath visible like smoke. She leaned against the railing, staring down at the dark water below, her reflection barely visible between ripples. She thought of the boy, the small hand clutching the toy car, the way he had said "Daddy" without hesitation. She thought of the woman too, not as an enemy but as another version of herself, someone who had also believed the same soft voice, the same promises, and suddenly the pain became too wide for anger. Back at his other house, David sat alone, the lights off, the silence unbearable. He had tried calling again, but each ring only deepened his guilt. He looked at the photo on the mantel, one from their wedding day, Martha's smile bright and unguarded, and he felt something inside him collapse. He turned to the woman, Emily, and said quietly, "She knows." Emily nodded, tears streaking her face. She said she seemed kind. "David, I didn't know she existed all these years. You never told me you were still married." He sat down, his hand shaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. "I thought I was protecting her from something from my past, but now I see I was just protecting myself from the truth." He pulled out an old envelope from the drawer, the paper yellowed and worn, a letter he had never sent, Martha's name written on the front in his handwriting. Inside were photos, a young woman, a child from years ago, not Emily, not the boy, but another face, a shadow from a life before Martha ever knew him. "Oh, one." Emily stared at him, confused. "Who is she?" David looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "My daughter from before Martha. And I met her mother, died when she was small. I couldn't handle it. I buried everything, moved away, started over. When I met Martha, I told myself I'd tell her one day, but the longer I waited, the harder it became, and then the lies became habit. When I said business trips, they weren't always lies, not at first, but then when I met you, I thought maybe I could make up for what I lost. And now I've ruined everything." Emily covered her mouth in shock. "You mean that boy? He isn't yours?" David nodded slowly, his eyes hollow. "I thought I could be the father he needed, but all I did was repeat my own mistakes." She walked away silently, unable to look at him. He sat there alone, the weight of his choices pressing down like stone. He looked at his phone again, one new message from Martha unread. He opened it. It said simply, "I know enough. Don't call until you know how to be honest." Martha, meanwhile, had driven to the old park where she and David had their first picnic. She parked and walked to the bench where they used to sit. She remembered his laughter, his stories, the way he'd said he wanted to build a life that meant something, and she realized that in a way he had built two, but one had been made of truth and the other of illusion. She sat there until dawn, the sky turning from black to gray to pale gold, the first light warming her face. She didn't cry this time, she just breathed. 1111 When the sun rose, she pulled out her phone again and opened his messages. There were 6 of them, all unread, each one shorter than the last. Please talk to me, I can explain. Please don't hate me, I made a mistake. And the last one, I never meant to hurt you. She stared at those words for a long time before typing back, don't explain, fix it if you can, but don't ask me to wait. She hit send and then deleted his number. She didn't want him to reach her, not until she was ready to be found again, if ever, or later. That day she drove home, the house quiet, the air heavy with memory. She walked through each room, slowly touching the furniture, the photos, the little pieces of a life built on half-truths. She stopped by the mirror in their bedroom, looking at her reflection. The woman staring back looked stronger, somehow older, wiser. She whispered to herself, you will survive this, and smiled faintly, a real smile, small but alive. She packed a small bag and stepped outside, locking the door behind her, the sound final, like a closing chapter.